I risked everything to stop my neighbor from debarking his dog. I, 30F, moved to a new neighborhood 6 years ago, hoping for quiet mornings, friendly hellos, and maybe the occasional barbecue smoke drifting over my fence. Everyone in the neighborhood had lived here for decades. The yards were immaculate, the houses well-maintained, and the children, if they were outside at all, seemed polite and well-behaved. For years, I kept to myself mostly, waving at neighbors, occasionally helping with block parties, nothing dramatic. Then Randy, 46M, moved in. He arrived one Saturday afternoon with a moving truck. He was a bulldozer of a man with sharp features and a permanent frown. Behind him followed Buck, a massive, muscular dog with an intimidating build and kind eyes. Buck barked the moment he stepped onto the lawn, a deep, echoing bark that made me jump. At first, I thought nothing of the dog's barking. It's what they do. I waved awkwardly as Randy disappeared into his house, dragging boxes. Within a week, I quickly learned that Randy had a problem with Buck's bark. Buck, like most dogs, reacted to everyday things, like the mail carrier, passing cars, and a cat darting across the street. Because of this, I noticed Randy adding more collars around Buck's neck, 3 different kinds within a single month. The first was a standard shock collar. Then came a vibrating collar. Finally, a remote-controlled device that made Buck yelp and recoil whenever Randy pressed the button. I could hear it through my walls. I would lay awake at night listening to Buck yelping while Randy shouted commands at him. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself to mind my own business, that it wasn't my place. But one night, around 11 p.m., I heard a blood-curdling yelp. I threw on my shoes and ran outside. Buck was pressed into a corner of the yard, ears pinned back, eyes wide, drooling and trembling. Randy was holding the remote in one hand, a beer in the other, yelling at the dog to stop barking. I quickly called animal control and gave them the address. They came, warned Randy, and left. The warnings were superficial. Randy nodded politely, muttering that he understood, then went back to his cruel routine. After that night, I reached out in the community group chat, trying to see if anyone else had noticed what I had. I didn't name Randy or make any accusations, just described the repeated yelping late at night, and a dog clearly in distress, and asked if anyone else had seen it. The replies dismissed my concern almost immediately. It's a dog. Dogs bark. You're reading too much into it. And mind your own business. No one asked which house it was. No one questioned whether the dog was hurt. The conversation slowly moved on, as if I hadn't said anything at all. Then, a few days later, during my usual morning run, I passed Randy on the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but a few words carried clearly. Next week, debarking. Buck. My heart sank. Debarking wasn't a form of training or discipline. It was surgery that cuts into a dog's vocal cords so it could never bark normally again. The idea of this happening to Buck made me feel physically ill. Over the next few days, I did everything I could to stop it. I contacted every vet in the area, asking if Buck had any upcoming appointments. Finally, I found the clinic where he was scheduled and kept calling, stressing how serious and time-sensitive the matter was. The clinic eventually removed the appointment from their schedule and refused to reschedule. I thought that would end it. Instead, it set him off. Randy began showing up at my door, yelling and accusing me of interfering with his property. He told neighbors I was deranged, that I had no respect for other people's rights. I tried to remain calm, but the threats escalated. Notes appeared in my mailbox saying, "Stop meddling or else." The police told me to document everything and avoid confrontation. And then, just as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. Randy no longer yelled, and Buck, who had once been constantly barking, went almost completely silent. I told myself it had been trained out of him, but the quiet felt wrong. Then, 2 days passed without me seeing Buck. Each time I came home, the yard was empty. My heart sank a little more with every step toward the gate, every glance around the yard. That evening, I knocked and called out, my voice trembling. Randy opened the door, his jaw tight, and said, "What do you want?" I said, "I just want to know where Buck is." He shot back, "Why do you care so much? Stay out of my business." I said, "I'm worried about him. I haven't seen him in 2 days." He quickly said, "Buck's out with a dog walker," before closing his door. Every instinct I had told me he was lying. After that conversation, I checked the shelters, the vets and social media. Nothing. The next morning, I heard faint whining from his garage. It was low and strained. I knew it was Buck. I tried calling Randy, but he wouldn't answer. The sound followed me all day, refusing to leave my head. Later that night, I noticed Randy wasn't home. His car was gone, the lights were off, and I knew this might be my only chance to check on Buck. I forced the garage door open. Inside, Buck was in a crate, heavily drugged, a cone on his head, blood around his throat. He flinched when I touched him, but his eyes recognized me. Randy had apparently attempted to DIY the debarking after the vet canceled the procedure. The thought of what he had done to him made me nauseous. I called the police, sobbing as I tried to explain what I had found. They arrived quickly, and after seeing Buck's condition, they contacted animal control themselves. Within minutes, the garage was filled with flashing lights and urgent voices. Buck was rushed to an emergency vet. That same night, police located Randy at a nearby bar where he had been drinking and arrested him on suspicion of animal cruelty. By the time the arrest was made, Buck was already in surgery. I stayed at the clinic while the medical team worked on him. A technician gently explained that the damage was extensive, that whatever Randy had tried to do at home had caused tearing and infection. They would do everything they could, but there were no guarantees. Around 3 a.m, a veterinarian came out and told me Buck had stabilized. He would live, but his bark would never return to normal. He might make horse sounds or wheezes, and he would likely have breathing issues for the rest of his life. I felt relief and guilt at the same time. Relief that he was alive, guilt that I couldn't undo what had already been done. By sunrise, animal control had officially seized Buck as evidence. Because Randy was in custody and the house was part of an active investigation, Buck couldn't go back there even temporarily. The officer asked if I knew anyone who could foster Buck. Once he was released from the vet, I surprised myself by saying, "I can." The officer looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and said, "We'll see what the court says." By the next afternoon, news spread quickly, and everyone on the block knew what had happened. The same neighbors who had told me to mind my own business, avoided eye contact when I stepped outside. A few crossed the street to avoid passing my house. One older woman knocked on my door with a plate of cookies and quietly said, "I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry." It wasn't an apology that fixed anything, but it was something. 2 days later, the legal reality set in. Randy was released on bail, and a temporary restraining order was issued that barred him from contacting me or returning to his house while the investigation continued. While the case moved forward on paper, Buck remained at the emergency vet, fighting his own slow recovery. He stayed there for a week. When animal control finally cleared him for release, they brought him to my house. He moved slowly, head low, cone still on, his body thinner than I remembered. He didn't bark when he stepped into my living room. Instead, he let out a soft, broken sound that barely carried. I sat on the floor with him, letting him come to me. When he rested his head against my leg, I cried harder than I had the night I found him. Caring for Buck wasn't easy. He needed medication several times a day, a special harness to avoid pressure on his throat, and constant monitoring. He startled easily and flinched if I raised my voice even slightly. At night, he would pace, nails clicking softly on the floor, until I lay down where he could see me. Slowly, over weeks, he learned the layout of my house. He began wagging his tail again. While Buck healed, the legal process dragged on in the background. I gave a formal statement to the police, and later testified before a judge at a preliminary hearing. Randy's lawyer argued that he was just trying to deal with a problem dog, and that I had interfered illegally. However, the veterinary records, photos from the garage, and the emergency vet's testimony told a different story. The judge ruled that the cruelty charge would proceed and extended the protective order in Buck's favor. Several neighbors were subpoenaed as witnesses, including a few who had dismissed my concerns in the group chat. One of them admitted under oath that she had heard yelping at night, but assumed it was normal training. Another said she didn't want to get involved. Hearing it laid out like that was disturbing, and it made me realize just how much silence had allowed Randy's cruelty to continue. As the legal process unfolded, life at home gradually shifted back toward quiet recovery. Over the next few months, Buck continued to recover as much as he could. He learned to communicate in other ways, pressing his head into my hand when he needed something, whining softly when he was anxious. We established a routine of short walks during quiet hours, avoiding loud streets. People sometimes stared when they noticed the scar on his throat, but most kept their distance. Eventually, the court date arrived. Randy pleaded guilty to felony animal cruelty as part of a deal. He was sentenced to jail time, mandatory counseling, and a lifetime ban on owning animals. The judge also ordered him to pay restitution for Buck's medical care. Justice didn't erase what Buck had endured, but it stopped Randy from doing it again. With the case closed, Animal Control asked if I wanted to formally adopt Buck. I didn't hesitate. The paperwork felt surreal after everything that had happened, but when the officer handed me his new tag with my address on it, it finally felt real. He was home for good. Looking back, I never imagined I'd be the person to call the police, confront a neighbor, and risk so much. I only knew that something was wrong, and that ignoring it felt worse than the risk of speaking up. In the end, it cost me comfort and anonymity, but it saved a life. And when Buck looks at me with steady eyes and thumps his tail against the floor, I know I would make the same choice again. That's all for now. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe for more.